Hey friends, this is Mark Suroviec, host of the Workplace Solutions podcast, inviting you to discover the joy of work. All right, Jim, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Fantastic. I am excited about today.
Me too.
Me too. Me 3. Me 7.
Yes. I am actually at someone else's place of business. I am not at my own house on a Zoom call. So this is, we're way above par.
And the Hawaiian shirt looks fantastic.
Thank you very much. I have multiple Hawaiian shirts that I get to wear when I, feel saucy, like on a Friday.
Love it. I am here with Jim Karwisch, who is what kind of coach would you describe yourself as?
Most people would probably call me a life coach or a success coach.
Okay.
So when I start long conversations, I say I'm a narrative coach because really it depends on what your goals are and what's in your way of your obtaining your goals. Pretty much tells me and you what kind of coach I am.
Full disclaimer, Jim is one of the folks who has been very important in my life. He is my coach and also has helped me start the podcast, launch the business, and those things. So I'm very thankful for him and his support during that time, even before I started the business. So he was instrumental in getting me to where I am now. So thank you, Jim, because I know I'm going to forget to thank you later, so I'm doing it now.
Excellent. You're welcome now.
Okay, fantastic. So today's topic is about getting untangled. And so we're going to be digging into narrative. So what does a narrative mean? Why is that important? And what happens when it gets tangled? And how do we untangle that? Sound good?
Absolutely.
All right. So, Jim, before we jump into the topic today, let's do something from our icebreaker deck here. A story from when you were learning to drive.
Oh, boy. Okay. Well, that's an easy one. My dad told me before I headed out to do a practice drive with my mother, I guess maybe I had done about 2 outings where I was driving on the actual highway, on the actual road. And this was maybe my 2nd or 3rd time out with my mom. And my dad said, do whatever your mother says. Whatever she says, without question, you do it. I don't know what was going through my mind. I'm not an idiot, but we were on a 4-lane highway. We're in a deep part of the small town that I grew up in. And we're in that area where it's like an Arby's and McDonald's, shopping centers and stuff. And we're on the right-hand side. And my mother says, get in the far left lane, which means on our side of the road, the farthest left that you can get. And what I did was cross all the lanes of traffic where at that moment there were no cars. And I got in the far left lane, which would be the right-hand side, slowest lane of oncoming traffic. And my mother screamed. And I saw a car coming, and I thought, well, certainly she intends to tell me what to do next because she's gotten us into this mess. And she's yelling, do you know what I mean? You know what I meant. And so I pull very quickly over into the parking lot of some furniture store or something like that while we sat there, and she tried to discern what on earth could have made me go to the far left lane, other than that she said, get in the far left lane. Mm-hmm. So to this day, I think she thinks I was doing it to be a smart, but I was just doing what my mother said to do.
That is an amazing story. Thank you. Oh, I'm going to take a minute to laugh. Oh, that explains why you were driving in reverse down the highway on the way
That's right.
here.
Somebody told me just back it on out of here, and I haven't gotten any different instructions since. I've been driving my car backwards for the last 6 months. No.
If you are a member of law enforcement, that is a joke.
Oh, right. If you're going to... Oh, boy, if I get arrested because of a podcast, I'm coming after you, Mark. But, if law enforcement is a big listener of yours, I support that too.
Yes. All right. Love it. So I always answer my own questions.
Oh, good.
So I'm thinking of before I was allowed to get my license, I would do practice driving with my dad. And we lived up in Pennsylvania in the snow belt. So if you think like Buffalo on the news, the big snowstorms. That was the weather that we'd have for a lot of the year. So before I was allowed to drive on my own, I had to be able to correct a fishtail. So we would go out on these country roads, drive about 40 miles an hour, and he would make me slam on the brakes and correct a fishtail, which is that's pretty hard. That's almost an advanced driving skill, and it was terrifying because the car would slide, and but I got really good at it. So much so that I would get a little cocky about it and go to the high school when the parking lot was empty and do my fishtailing and donuts and things in the snow. And so it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized that other people didn't have that experience. Like, what? Your parents didn't make you practice fishtailing and correcting the car going out of control down the road? Like, no, no one does that.
That's fantastic. Now, did you master the fishtail into a parallel parking situation?
No.
Because I've seen that on the television, and it is quite impressive.
No, I don't parallel park unless that's the only option.
Except by accident.
Yeah. No, but I have, growing up in that winter environment, there are times where I hit the brakes and did a 360 through an intersection. So like that's part of the deal. But to this day, I feel very, very confident that I can correct a fishtail whenever possible.
That's great. I feel very comfortable riding with you. I don't know where we're going to go, but I now have more confidence in your driving.
All right, let's go to.
Let's just do the rest of the podcast in your car.
Yeah, there you
go. You'll hear white knuckles every once in a while as Mark fishtails us very near objects.
Love it. All right, let's transition a little bit before we get into our topic of narrative and getting untangled. Jim, can you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you get to where you are now?
Oh wow, it's a weird and twisted tale, but I'll try and do the short version of it. I had two lives going at the same time. When I went to college for theater because that was the main thing that had held my attention. I didn't know it at the time, but I had ADHD as a kid. I've been diagnosed now as an adult, but ADHD people tend to find things to hyper-focus on. And if they're really interested, they can get very, very good at something. And if they're not super interested in it, they can have trouble even engaging with it at all. And theater really grabbed my attention. My grades improved. My mom was very invested in me staying in the theater, so she even put me I went to college to get a theater degree. When I finished my degree in theater, where I had to take all types of extra classes like communications classes, I learned film and radio and TV and theater, etc. When I left there, I did some theater, but then I moved to Chicago where I got a day job as an administrative assistant so that I could have an evening life as an improviser. And those two lives kind of paralleled each other for, 20 years, where I would always have some sort of a performance-based business in my evenings, and I would always have some sort of regular business job during the day. And so I learned everything pretty much there was to know. I worked my way up from being an administrative assistant, and I became an underwriter for a bank. I became a supervisor for a client support area. I got into the innovation and communications area. And so I continued to level up in the business world while I was also helping people in my evening to learn improvisation. But also people would come to me and they would ask me a lot of questions, almost, I don't want to say, they might not say a father figure, but that's kind of the vibe that it was I'm going to go ask this person who seems to be able to help me gain clarity on things. What should I do about this thing? And usually we would have a conversation. We would figure out where they were stuck or where they were tangled and get them untangled. And when it came time for me to figure out that I wanted to do something outside of the regular business world, didn't know what that would be, tried a lot of different things. I became a facilitator. I did improv. I took all kinds of odd assignments, doing mediation for people, doing pretty much anything that was offered up. But the things that really stuck were facilitation and coaching. And when the pandemic hit, the coaching part of my world, it was already a solid part of my business, but it it became pretty much all of my business. Everything became coaching, and facilitation got really, really small at that point. And so now today, I ever since 2014, I've been a coach, but since the pandemic started, I've been a coach pretty much as my main job every day.
Okay. And what does that look like when you're working with a client?
Yeah. So I always engage with a free discovery session. I figure out whether or not I think that what they need is something I can provide, or that we would work well together. I usually try to get them in a position where they can pretty easily say no to the work if they don't really want to go forward with it, because I don't really believe in that type of pressured sale where you end up buying a package of sessions and then you're unhappy by the first one. So I usually walk in and tell them, I'm going to try and prove that you don't need me during this discovery session. And if we finish and I'm not successful and you want to work with me, I think we'd be a good fit with each other, then we'll set ourselves up with some sessions and get started. And then after that, it is all about what is blocking that person. What is it that is in their way? What skill sets do they not have? What is blocking their communication with somebody else? What biases do they have? Or what self-limiting belief systems do they have that are in their way that need to be changed or reframed or moved out in order for them to succeed?
So can you define narrative in the context that we're talking about today? So when you say a tangled narrative or getting untangled, what are you talking about?
If I only had a minute of somebody's time, I would probably just reframe it and talk about story. So a story that you have in your own mind about yourself, or a story that somebody else tells about you. So I break it down essentially. This is not a psychological breakdown. This is just for me to be able to describe what I do to other people. I broke it down into 3 types of narrative. There's an inner narrative that you are constantly updating and perpetuating in your own mind with your thoughts. You might say things out loud, but you are creating a story in your own mind about your own level of expertise, or about how valuable you are to those around you, or whether or not you would make a good husband. And your identity is shaped by that story. So if somebody asked you, what are you, or what do you do, or any of those introductory type questions, usually people, their identity in the United States is often what work they do. And so they'll say, oh, I'm a facilitator, or oh, I'm a coach, oh, I'm a contractor, whatever it is. So what you would say if you finished the phrase, I am a blank, is often tied to your narrative, what it is that you've developed over time to believe that you are. And so if there's an inner narrative, then the outside version of that would be a social narrative. What do I say about myself to you? What do you say about me to others or to me? And so that social narrative leads then to the value narrative. So if you have a particular opinion of me, you're a big figure in my life, you have a loud voice, you're an intimidating presence, I see you as an authority figure, I might very well adopt your social narrative about me as a part of my inner narrative. And worse, I might assign it as my value narrative as well. I will never amount to anything. I'm just a slob. I'm lazy. I'll never get a job. I've tried and I'm just not capable, right? Or I'm not qualified, or I'm dumb, any of those types of things. So generally, all of those different small phrases that are self-limiting beliefs or things that people believe, might say about themselves half-heartedly or earnestly, combined together, they form a story or a narrative. And that's where I work. I listen very closely to whatever it is they say about themselves. I listen for the things they value. I listen for the things that they are afraid of. And with all of those little pieces, all of those belief systems, all of those contradictory phrases, when I hear what their mom would say about them, when I hear what their fellow employees would say about them, what they think of themselves, all of it goes together into one picture, and that's what I call the narrative. And the untangled part of it is, or I guess I should say the tangle that happens in people's narratives are when 2 of those pieces don't fit together. They might be directly conflicting. One person who's in let's say you work at an office and your manager thinks that you're capable of being a manager yourself, and they want to promote you. And your inner narrative says, no, I'm an idiot. I barely scrape by in the job that I'm in. I certainly shouldn't be leading people. the likelihood that you're going to take the job is less because your inner narrative conflicts with the social narrative that they have about you. And generally, people who have that type of conflict either take the job because it was offered to them and they don't know how to not take it, but they have a really hard time functioning in their day-to-day with a conflicting or a tangled narrative, or they don't take it because they don't feel they're qualified, or they don't pursue, they don't put in the application like they were asked to. They just skip the opportunity because they don't believe themselves to be capable of something that maybe they are.
I'm thinking of imposter syndrome. Is that kind of what you're describing, or is that subtly different?
So imposter syndrome pops up generally. And now, again, this is not psychological advice, but the things that I have experienced most about imposter syndrome pops up when you have evidence to believe that you are qualified at something, but all of a sudden there's just this striking fear. Wait, what if I'm not? And so it's not your narrative that's telling you that you're not capable of something. There's just a sudden fear that, wait, what if I'm a fraud? What if all this stuff that I think is good evidence that I would be qualified to do this isn't real? So at any point in time, somebody could discover that I'm not actually qualified for this, right? And so an imposter syndrome is kind of a fear, and that goes to the things that I search for when I'm talking with people. If I know what you value, I know what you fear, and I've listened to your story, I can usually piece out which thing is imposter syndrome and which thing is actually a deeply held belief. So somebody who has a deeply held belief that they are an imposter would never really have imposter syndrome that they could identify, because they would start out saying just boldly to you, well, I'm not qualified to do that.
They wouldn't even get to the point of confidence where they they could doubt themselves. They're not anywhere close.
Yeah. Okay. And then there are people that have the opposite of imposter syndrome, which is they very well know that they are not yet qualified to do the thing. They don't have the experience, but they trust in themselves. They believe their narrative tells them that they'll be able to tackle whatever it is that comes along. So if the person says, do you think you would be able to do this in the work? And they say, yeah, I would be able to do that. They move forward as if that's going to be a possibility, even though the person who doesn't, somebody who might have some qualifications feels like, wait, how are you going to take that job? You're not qualified for it. Well, I believe that I'm going to be able to handle this job. And so I'm going to say yes to it. I'm going to move forward and do it anyway. Their narrative says that they can do whatever they want to do, right? And sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong.
Yeah, so it's great if you are a rapid learner or multi-talented, and it's terrible if you're not.
Yeah. So I think the people that have mounting evidence, I'll just give a quick story of a client that he actually likes being mentioned, so I'll mention him. His name is David Clark, and he told me in one of the very first meetings that we had, one of the first sessions where we were coaching together, he said, I have 40 something years of experience that tells me that this is not possible. And so immediately instead of just going, oh, wow, well, you're probably right then. You know yourself better than I do. I immediately latched onto that as, well, how did you collect that data? Is that data really good data? Like, what are we really looking at here? So I got really, really interested in what did these failures that he experienced over time look like, and how is he counting them, and how is he deciding, like how is he coming to the decision that this was a failure, I'm not capable of this. And so within 6 months we had completely worked out that tangle. Probably we had worked it out before 6 months, but we had a long haul with a lot of things that he had as goals. But he essentially went from, I have 40 something years of data experience that tells me that I can't do that thing, to I was looking at all of these failures the wrong way. And I now have 40 something years of experience that tells me how I can do this and what things don't work and what types of ways I can get in my own way. So untangling it really just brings a sense of, oh, okay, the path in front of me is not blocked off by me not being capable. It's blocked off by me having some sort of belief that I don't really need to believe. It's something I crafted for myself, or somebody else put it in my head, but I'm holding on to it like it's a truth, like it's gravity, or like it's, surface tension of water, and it's not. It's just a story. It's just a series of stories, or a series of little bits of stories.
It sounds like what you're describing is highly individualized, what are some patterns or commonalities that you've seen in the folks that you've worked with?
Sure. If people approach me knowing what I do already, they're generally showing up because they're either not getting traction on a thing they're trying to do, or they are not feeling confident enough to do the thing that they want to do. Now, once you get past the theme of confidence and the goal of getting that person more confident, they couldn't be any further away from one another as far as what they might be trying to do or what they lack confidence in. But a lot of people, because they know that I have a lot of knowledge about communications and presenting to people and giving keynote talks, those types of things, they'll come to me thinking, I'll see if I can get some pointers from Jim on my narrative. And what we end up doing is looking at their confidence very closely. And once we address the confidence part, the rest of it starts to fix itself. Now, there are lots of things that you can Google about how to present well. You can, here's how to take care of your voice, and here's how to stand confidently in front of a group, and here are power poses and all those types of things. So people that can go to the internet who don't have a problem with confidence, a lot of times can find some pointers, and then they just figure it out as they go along. But people who don't feel confident will a lot of times hire me because they want to feel confident. There's something in there that says, I'm scared of doing this thing. I'm scared of getting up in front of people, or I'm scared of approaching this leadership position, but something deep down in me wants to do this anyway. Can you help me get to where I believe I can?
I'm sure it's helpful. I know I experienced this. It's helpful to have an outside perspective that's not a person in your organization that is trusted, that it's not going to, what you say is not going to get back to the manager.
That's right. That's right. And even though I'm not a therapist and I'm not any, I don't have any type of degree, like I don't work in psychology or anything like that, I do hold myself to privacy and making sure that if it's not something that is illegal, that you confess to me, or if it's not something where somebody has subpoenaed me, then I'm probably not going to share what it is voluntarily. That does give people a lot of confidence. And a lot of times I work with teams where there are people who don't like each other very much, and I'm coaching both of them, but I'm coaching them from their own narrative. So during the conversation with person A, I am fully just invested in how they're viewing the situation and getting them untangled to the point where they feel like they can see that other person differently. And then I'm doing the same thing with person B toward person A. And then eventually when they do reach a place where they can work things out, I bring them together and they start to apply that narrative work to each other. And so a social narrative that you have about a person that you don't like very much might be completely a situation that was misconstrued or just a one-time occurrence that you took as that's who that person is. And so you don't like them very much and you have a hard time working with them and you don't really want to be around them. So the untangling of the narratives come from all sorts of directions. It might be interpersonal problems. It might be confidence issues. It might be that they can't get traction. And every once in a while, it might just be that they don't have the right resources, or they might not be thinking about their resources the right way. They might feel very alone when they're not really alone. They might have access to things that they're not really thinking about. So the narrative basically is one big wrapper for all of the things that we think about and believe about ourselves and others, but in the form of a story.
Similar, I think Brené Brown describes it as the story I tell myself. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I love Brené Brown. So
she's fantastic.
Yes, amazing stuff. And if you're listening to this and you haven't read a book by Brené Brown, pick anything you see on your Barnes & Noble shelf and read it immediately. Or local small bookseller. Brené Brown is amazing.
Brené, if you're listening, we'd love to have you on the podcast.
That's right. That's right.
We might need to get a few more downloads first.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows? That one download, it might be her.
Yeah. Going back to that example of coaching two different people on the same team, can you tell a story or give an example, obviously without disclosing any confidential information?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Can you tell us a story about that?
A story that I'll tell first is my own experience. When I was in my 20s, I was working, and I mentioned it before, as an administrative assistant for a bank. There was a particular person that really, really disliked me, and I didn't have any idea why. And I was young enough to have not built myself up to a place yet. Today, I would approach things very differently if I thought somebody didn't like me. But at that point in time, my attitude was, I've tried to talk to this person. They very much do not like me and have let me know this. So if they don't like me, I guess I don't like them. And so over time, because my mind was set to, if they don't like me, then I don't like them, anything that they did that was negative went in as a vote into this ballot box of them. That's why I don't like them. Over time, it stopped being, if they don't like me, then I don't like them very much. And it became a real distaste for another person. And one day, this particular person was out on medical leave. And I didn't really understand what it was, but it turned out that she had fallen and broken her arm in several places. It was a pretty bad break, and she was out getting it reset and having physical therapy. And when she came back, I guess it was maybe 4 or 5 weeks later, she came back to work. She behaved completely differently towards me. She had, in her mind, changed something about how she related to me, and she was treating me as though I was a friend of hers. But I had done all of this work on my side of the situation to build her up as somebody that I don't really like. And that's when I had to start questioning it for myself. This person now likes me, but I've now gathered all these things together, and I'm kind of holding them close to my chest, because if they don't like me, then I don't like them. But now they do like me. So what do I do? And I had to look at my own story, and I had to look at all of these little things that I'd compiled together. And I thought, well, this is all just made up. These are all just instances that I've just gathered together to support an idea that I don't really need to have. Piece by piece, I took those things away. I looked at each of them, all of the different things that person had done that I put in the column of them not being a good person. I took it, I re-examined it. I asked myself fairly, if this was a good person and they had done this thing, how would I react then? And so over the course of a couple of weeks, we became friends. And I never broached the subject of why she didn't like me when we first started. I had no idea. Maybe it was something that she had gone through and I reminded her of somebody. Maybe it was something that I had done on my first couple of days of work that really offended her. I don't know. But I do know that her behavior changed. She accepted me. She became my friend. I did the same thing. And both of us got to a place where we, as friends, that we were untangled. I can say that story very easily because it's my own story, and I don't feel like I would be betraying anybody's confidence by saying it. But again, I can say that when people dislike each other, generally, they have created a narrative for themselves about that person where they're having trouble with them. And some of it is very valid. And some of it is just things that they've gathered around themselves because they got hurt or injured, and they gather close additional evidence to say, well, you know, that person who hurt me, that person who I don't like very much, here are more things and more things about them that I don't really like. And it kind of justifies the feeling of, well, I'm not the bad person here. I'm the good person here. That person is the bad person here. And the truth of it usually is that it's two human beings, and they both have done something that the other person didn't like, or something that is based on a different value system. But if both people want to work on it, then generally I can work individually. They can get to a place where they have a healthy narrative about that person. They can move forward with compassion and curiosity about that other person. And they can maybe, after a little bit of time coaching, admit that other person might not be so bad. And then once they have a good interaction with that person that doesn't bring along that narrative, they start to build toward a friendship. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes it can result in them becoming good friends because their previous history against one another actually worked the other way, right? As they were untangling and getting the other person, they thought about them so much, and they invested so much energy into, why do I not like this person? And what do I have against this person? That they actually end up liking that person. Not always, but sometimes. But generally the result, when it's successful, which it is most of the time, unless there's some big breach of trust that is so profound that, you know, we really don't need to be coaching out of this. You guys should just go get jobs at different companies. This is not really there's not really a whole lot of you guys getting back from this. But when people can move forward from it, often the result is that they can work just fine together. And sometimes it involves them becoming pretty good friends. And they have a good story to tell after that about how they didn't like each other for a while.
It actually reminds me, the person that I was closest to in my previous organization, when we started out, we were definitely frenemies. So we did not like each other. We got on each other's nerves. And there were days when we were screaming at the top of our lungs at each other, which is 100% not appropriate. But it was just an unhealthy cycle where I would push his buttons, he would push my buttons, I would push his buttons. And I don't know when it changed, but at some point we turned that corner. And by the end of my tenure there, he had become my closest ally and closest friend at that organization. And so it just,
Absolutely.
it's fascinating.
Yeah. And so that's an example of without coaching, the person actually does eventually over time gets to the place where everything's okay. Like we became friends. We started out this, we didn't really address it with a coach. We didn't have somebody intervene, but over time we did get to a place where it turns out we're very close to one another. And so that's an example of without a coach, you might very well succeed on your own, but how long will it take? So sometimes coaching is really just about how long do you want it to be before you are okay with working with this person? Can you take the next 5 years and get to a good place with them? And if you can, then why do you need me? And if you can't, then we should really get started.
That's a good spot to pause. So I'm here with Jim Karwisch, aka Jim Prov of Untangled Narrative, who is a professional coach. And we will see you next week for part 2. Life is way too short for work to suck. So if you want help to build your team, train your team, or manage your team, we're here. Come see us at workplaysolutions.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast.
I have this idea that whenever you cough, I'm going to say something that's so valuable that you can't cut it out so that they have to listen to you.
Well, good thing we are on 2 different audio tracks.
That's right. Fantastic.